The modern charismatic practice of speaking in tongues is a point of deep fracture. While millions view this as a profound biblical reality, critics frequently categorize these sounds as mere ecstatic gibberish. The cessationist view, championed by commentators like Todd Friel, relies on an inflexible framework to evaluate the gifts of the Spirit. That framework dictates that true biblical tongues are strictly translatable, known human languages with standard syntax and grammar. Under this view, these languages exist exclusively for horizontal communication, the evangelism of people from other nations. The primary anchor for this position is Jerusalem during the events of Pentecost recorded in Acts chapter 2. On that day, a group of untrained Galileans spoke in the native regional dialects of the foreigners visiting the city. This chart represents the skeptic's equation. Tongues are known human languages, and their purpose is evangelism. If this equation acts as the absolute rule for the entire New Testament, then modern private prayer languages are unbiblical by definition. But leaving Jerusalem and examining the church in Corinth reveals a major textual complication. Paul describes a practice operating inside the local church that contradicts the framework of Acts 2. Look at the text of 1 Corinthians 14, verse 2. Paul writes, "For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men but to God." He continues, "For no one understands him," and concludes, "But he utters mysteries in the Spirit." If the gift is strictly a human dialect meant for earthly evangelism, Paul's description is impossible. A foreign language meant for men would be understood by men, not spoken exclusively to God. The New Testament presents a dual taxonomy, xenolalia and glossolalia. Xenolalia refers to the miraculous speaking of an unlearned but known human language. Glossolalia describes the utterance of a language unknown to both the speaker and the listener, a vertical communion with God. Comparing the events in Jerusalem with the instruction sent to Corinth reveals two distinct profiles for the same gift. This column shows the speaker in Acts 2 directing their message outward to a horizontal network of listeners from Parthia, Media, and Elam. This audience consisted of a crowd of unbelieving Jews from the diaspora, the historical dispersion of Israelites outside their ancestral homeland. The speech declared the works of God to a foreign crowd by circumventing the language barrier. These mechanics define xenolalia, human languages that the speakers had never learned, but the audience naturally comprehended. The Acts 2 model accounts for a public, horizontal sign designed for unbelievers, but it only represents half of the biblical data. The right side of the matrix maps Paul's theology in 1 Corinthians 14. The direction of communication shifts from horizontal toward men to vertical upward to God. The text explicitly states that the audience for this speech is the divine, not a human crowd. The content consists of mysteries in the Spirit rather than regional dialects. Later in verses 14 through 17, Paul identifies the specific function of this speech. It operates as prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. These unique characteristics are the precise markers of glossolalia.
Glossolalia operates as a transcognitive language, meaning that it completely bypasses the speaker's intellect to communicate directly with the Creator. Forcing the Acts 2 model onto the church in Corinth creates a logical break in the text. Resolving the data requires acknowledging a distinct prayer language. Critics often point to self-edification as proof that private tongues are illegitimate. The claim is that a spiritual gift lacking cognitive translation is useless, and building up only oneself is inherently selfish. Yet Paul states in 1 Corinthians 14:4 that the one who speaks in a tongue builds himself up, presenting this as a factual benefit, not a rebuke. This aligns with Jude 20, which instructs believers to build yourselves up in your most holy faith and pray in the Holy Spirit. Personal fortification is a structural necessity. A believer must possess inner spiritual strength before they can effectively serve the congregation. While corporate utility, serving the community, is the ultimate goal for public gifts, private fortification makes that utility possible. Self-edification functions as a structural prerequisite. A single pillar must be reinforced before it can support the weight of a corporate ceiling. Cessationists also look to 1 Corinthians 13:8, which says gifts like tongues will cease when the perfect comes. They argue the perfect refers historically to the completed and bound biblical canon. However, Paul defines the specific conditions that mark the arrival of the perfect. He notes that when it arrives, we will see face to face, and we will know fully, even as I have been fully known. These phrases clearly describe an eschatological reality, the final events of human history involving the unmediated, direct presence of God. The completed New Testament did not grant believers the ability to see God face to face, nor did it result in complete omniscient knowledge. The evidence suggests that spiritual gifts are the necessary scaffolding for this age, operating until the return of Christ. This leads to the teleological question: what is the design and purpose of a gift that bypasses the mind? A foundational theological axiom states that finite human vocabulary is insufficient to capture the infinite nature of God. This sphere represents the entirety of human language. Believers often hit a linguistic wall, unable to articulate the weight of deep worship or intense suffering. In these moments, human intellect exhausts its own resources. Romans 8 addresses this limitation, describing how the Spirit intercedes for us with groanings too deep for human words. Glossolalia functions as a divinely engineered bypass for these cognitive limitations. Theologian Sam Storms refers to this as the language of heaven. The Holy Spirit empowers the human spirit to bypass the mind, articulating the infinite back to God. The skeptic demands absolute rationality in all spiritual gifts, insisting that if a prayer cannot be mapped on an earthly syntax tree, it is illegitimate. But the biblical evidence points toward a functional interface, a way for a finite mind to engage with an infinite subject. The gift of tongues provides a linguistic bridge, connecting the limitations of human vocabulary to the profound depths of the divine.